Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AESP online webinar entitled Innovating is Demanding, Overcoming the Challenges Presented from a Demand Management Pilot. My name is MatthewMark with the Franklin Energy Group, and I'm joined by my fellow co-presenter Mark Brown with Accelerated Innovations. They were a partner of ours on this pilot, and he's also a former colleague of mine. Today, our online presentation focuses on some of the challenges we encountered during an innovative 18-month pilot that sought to answer the question, can large commercial and industrial customers, when provided with financial incentives and innovative tools, be able to better understand and manage their on-peak demand charges? So here's a summary of the key topics we'll be discussing during the next 20 minutes or so. We'll talk a little bit about some of the regulatory pressures in Wisconsin, which led to the genesis of the on-demand savings pilot. We'll also provide a high-level program overview and discuss some key design elements of the pilot. Mark Brown is then going to walk you through some of the features of the online customer energy dashboard that we equipped pilot participants with to help them better manage their on-peak summertime demand. He's also going to discuss some of the early design challenges that the pilot team encountered and actions that we took during the development period to overcome those challenges, as well as provide suggestions for how to make this program model even more successful, given additional infrastructure enhancements that can make the startup phase a little bit smoother. And then last but not least, I'm going to provide a summary of lessons learned to round out the presentation that will also include some final quantitative and qualitative results of the pilot. So let's step back for a moment and look at the impact of energy efficiency programs on a more broad level over the last decade. The line graph here shows that DSM programs have really been effective in curbing energy use on a national scale. This information was pulled by one of our partners on the pilot, Enernex, directly from the Energy and Information Administration. And the graph here shows that electricity consumption sales have remained stagnant since 2006, with growth over the last 10 years being less than 2% total. However, if you look at the generating capacity that has come online since 2006, it hovers around 8% growth. This increase in generating capacity suggests that additional power plants are being built to accommodate growing customer demand, not consumption. Typically, demand charges can make up anywhere from 30 to 70% of large commercial and industrial utility costs. Yet this component of their utility bill is largely ignored, as efficiency programs over the years have focused on efficiency through equipment changeouts, as opposed to truly understanding a customer's load profile and when it's in their best interests to shed peak demand based on their rate structure. So what does the chart really tell you? Both utilities and customers have a greater need for incorporating true demand management programs into their DSM portfolios. Okay, so let's drill down a little more and see what's going on in Wisconsin as of late. Within the last 3 years, 3 rate cases were approved by the Public Service Commission involving 3 of the largest investor-owned utilities that could dramatically impact the way that Focus on Energy goes to market to help customers reduce their utility costs. These graphs provide a summary of the impacts of the approved rate cases. So for the 3 rate cases, energy charges, or the kWh component of their bills, dropped on average 1.6%, while on-peak demand charges increased by roughly 9%. On top of that, all ratepayers saw a significant increase in the fixed fee component of their utility bills. So what does all this mean for both the Focus on Energy program and for the customers they serve? Well, these rate cases clearly devalue the importance of selling energy efficiency projects based on kWh savings or therm savings alone. As more and more rate cases like these are approved across the country, the impact of energy efficiency projects that end users implement become less and less economically viable. In response to these emerging rate cases, the National Governors Association convened a summit in the summer of 2014 with Focus on Energy program stakeholders with the objective to identify concepts that could be an answer to the results of the rate cases that could supplement the existing Focus portfolio of program offerings. And the end result was a $2 million grant provided by Focus on Energy to design and implement a pilot program in partnership with Madison Gas and Electric to provide electric demand customers with education, tools, and financial incentives. The pilot objective was to help customers better understand their summertime on-peak demand charges and to help them implement strategies to reduce the demand by leveraging the capabilities of their existing building automation systems or energy management systems. And this program will be referred to as the On-Demand Savings Program. So I'll provide a quick overview of the pilot. The primary objective, again, of the pilot was to offer participants customized expert advice on how to reduce demand at their facility, provide financial incentives for actual demand reduction, and also offer a free subscription to a real-time energy dashboard that visualized real-time customer demand at their facility. The On-Demand Savings Program started in August of 2015 and ran through September of 2016. And the program incentivized demand reduction during the on-peak summer hours, which are defined by MG&E as June through September, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday, excluding holidays. Okay, so here's a quick overview of Madison Gas and Electric. They are the electric and natural gas provider to roughly 150,000 residential and business customers in Dane County, with the majority of their customers in the city of Madison proper, as the map suggests. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Madison, the capital of the great state of Wisconsin, a very progressive city. And sitting right in the heart of Madison is the University of Wisconsin, home to the Badgers. That was recently recognized as the 11th best public university in the United States, with an overall enrollment of over 40,000 students. So with the assistance of MG and Madison Gas and Electric's utility account managers, we enrolled 42 customers for the pilot. And the makeup of the customer participants spanned a wide range of businesses, from large hotels with significant banquet facilities, to casinos, to healthcare facilities, and to general office space. We also targeted customers that had a peak demand of at least 100 kW, an existing energy management system, and the ability to cycle equipment or stagger startup times. And we were also very selective in only allowing customers that hadn't changed facility space drastically in the last 3 years, which would invalidate the historical baseline that we were trying to determine for each unique facility with the summertime period that was to be evaluated for the pilot purpose. Okay, so this slide really illustrates what our core objective was. Here's an example of a 24-hour window of a customer's load shape or their peak load profile. And you can see the critical period that we're evaluating customer demand, again, begins at 10 a.m. and ends at 9 p.m., which is the summation of MG&E's 3 on-peak billing windows. We compiled data from the previous 2 summers to create a historical baseline, which is represented on the graph as the green line. We then created an adjusted baseline that took into account such variables as significant temperature changes from the baseline year, or if there was a change in space type at the facility since the last summertime period, that would influence the customer's energy profile, or even major upgrades to energy using equipment. We had to consider all the variables at place that could have impacted their load shape for this summertime from the previous 2. And so this graph illustrates what we had hoped to accomplish for each one of our pilot participants. We took the historical 15-minute interval data from the last 2 summer times, and we created a monthly baseline unique to June, July, August, and September. We then compared performance at the end of the month with the existing site baselines that were created. Again, the orange line represents the actual baseline data without any adjustments, and the green line represents the adjusted baseline that would become the true baseline for that particular month. The delta between the customer's max on-peak demand point for that particular month and the max value from the adjusted baseline is how we determine the success of the customers in their ability to shed load when it was most impactful for them. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mark Brown, who's going to be speaking for the next 7 slides to provide a cursory overview of the online portal that was used for the duration of the pilot. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you all for taking time to learn more about our experience with the program. Happy to be coming to you live or recorded from a secure windowless conference room here in St. Paul, Minnesota, where our team at Accelerated Innovations is based. And as Matt mentioned, we were the provider of the customer engagement platform for Madison Gas and Electric's customers to access real-time data from their utility meters. And it really presented a challenge for our team. As many of you familiar with AMI enabled meter data presentment may be aware, oftentimes customers are only accessing prior day data or data that may be several hours old, and therefore unable to really react in true real time as load changes in the facility. And so what we were able to do in this case is deploy with some hardware on site with the customers the ability to push data to our cloud servers and present that in real time to customers. And also importantly, because customers are not always going to be positioned in front of of a desktop monitor or in front of their dashboard, we need to push out alerts to those customers to make them aware of the changes in energy use in their facility, especially as that load approaches those threshold critical levels that Matt had mentioned. We were able to provide historical data so that customers could compare current period usage to historical data going back as far as 2 years. I want to take some time to step you through some of the elements of the customer engagement platform and also talk about the infrastructure that was put in place to enable this. What you're seeing here is a snapshot of the customer portal, and a few things to note. We're looking right now at the charting page, and I'll talk a little bit more about the chart in a second, but want to just take you through some of the things at the top of the screen. As you can see, next to the chart page option, there's an option for customers to access the data if they want to look at that granular 15-minute data, hourly data, daily data, take it offline, do some analysis of their own. We provided that access as well. And the property section of the dashboard was an essential place for us to work with customers to document the strategies, both automated and manual, to help reduce load when they are approaching those critical periods. And I'll talk more about some of those strategies and how we can document that as part of the platform in a minute. Going across the top, you'll see a few what we call widgets that are meant to be at-a-glance feedback. The first being the latest read. You can see here this customer at 4:00 p.m. for that 15-minute interval had registered a 664 kW demand in the facility, which represented 98% of their targeted threshold. That next widget, as you see here, they were setting a 15% savings goal. So all the customers participating in the program were able to identify their targeted on-peak demand reduction goals and track against that. And fortunately, this customer for this month has already experienced a peak demand event of over 6% above that 690 or 679 kW target. And as you can see on the next on-demand widget, they're able to look back over a 3-month period. You can see that 720 kW, maybe a little hard to make out, but that is that demand event that actually pushed them over the goal. And finally, they can link directly from the dashboard back to those load strategies that I'll talk about in a minute. Just to touch on what you're seeing in the graph itself, this is actually going back to a summer period 2 years prior in July of 2014, where they could look at another period where they exceeded a threshold and kind of an unusual load shape. So maybe something that they could try to understand what may have been going on in the facility to kind of trigger that hour and a half or so that really looked outside of the norm. But gives you just a little bit of an idea of some of the ways customers were able to use these tools to investigate their load profile and track their progress towards goals. In terms of the infrastructure that we had in place, it wasn't until more recently that MG&E, Madison Gas and Electric, had begun rolling out its AMI infrastructure, and I'll talk about some of the capabilities that provides in a minute. But we were working with customers with AMR meters, and so it required an actual physical KYZ pulse output coming off of the utility meter into a utility-installed isolation relay. From that isolation relay, there was a connection that could be fed into the building's energy management system or a building automation system if those capabilities existed, and the customers could work with their vendors to program automated load shedding strategies. And we did have several customers that saw significant results from those automated strategies. We also were taking that relay output and putting it through a gateway device installed at the customer site. And that gateway device provided connectivity via the customer's local area network, their LAN network and Ethernet connection, to push data out to the cloud. And in this case, the data was going to that gateway device. As Watt Vision is the provider of that device. So their application server was receiving that data in every few second reads, actually. And then we had a web services connection to our MyMeter customer engagement platform that allowed us to present that data to the customers in real time, to trigger those automated alerts as customers could be made aware of load approaching threshold levels. in their facilities. So some real challenges here to accomplish this. First of all, with respect to location, we wanted to have enough signal strength to be able to reliably provide that signal and present that to customers. So there were some physical limitations on the distance between the relay and the gateway device. In some cases, we had to accommodate installing an Ethernet connection that could be in proximity to the gateway device as well. So working with the customers, especially the IT stakeholders with the customers, to enable access for that device to sit on the network and communicate out the data. So, some challenges there to work through to make sure we have the right communications enabled and had everybody's buy-in to install the device. We also, had to battle some challenges with respect to reliability of the communication. Something as simple as somebody unplugging the power supply to the gateway device could cut off communication of the meter data. And we needed to make sure we could react as quickly as possible to any of those communication issues, and then do our best to ensure the data quality and any resulting abnormalities were addressed. What's exciting is Madison Gas and Electric has successfully rolled out AMI infrastructure across a large proportion of their commercial and industrial customer population, and these new meters are equipped with radio devices that can provide wireless communication in the facility, and we're working with Madison Gas and Electric on the potential to have a wireless connection to that meter data, again enabling true real-time communication, but avoiding any of the wired connection to the meter. We're hopeful that this can avoid having to have somebody on site to install the gateway device and those wire connections. By going to this wireless solution, we're hoping this can even be a potential customer self-install, where our team can work on provisioning the communication between that gateway device and the meter, making sure there's the proper authentication and security, and then allowing that device again to communicate through the customer LAN to our cloud servers and present that meter data in real time to the customers. What you're seeing here is a little bit of a screenshot from the property profile section of the dashboard. And this is a place where customers can document, as I mentioned, both automated strategies for load shedding, as well as, and in many cases, customers needing to rely on manual strategies. So a place for them to take notes. The example that you see here, the customer is focused on the opportunity with their chiller plant to make some changes to set points as they're experiencing or anticipating peak periods with respect to temperature set points, as well as the sequencing of the equipment with those chillers. So, an example, some other customers were cycling air handling equipment or lowering lighting levels to address this. And this was really driven by the fact that despite having systems for energy management or building automation, there were oftentimes only the ability to view information and not really to actually control to control equipment based on that pulse signal coming into the EMS or the building automation system. So, the reliance on manual strategies actually proved to be, oftentimes the best solution to help customers manage their load, and especially, highlights the importance of that real-time communication and alerting the facility personnel to the opportunities to avoid increasing their peak demand and crossing those thresholds. In real time, customers could also document their interventions, and this through the platforms, what we call energy markers. Users can document manual interventions. If there were equipment changeouts, upgrades, those events could be documented, and then we have reporting for the customer stakeholders to review that information, for the program teams to review that information, and really understand what are the impacts of those interventions. And we're excited to be moving forward with additional analytics in the future that are going to help quantify the impact of those events on energy savings. So, great to see that this in the pilot program was something the customers were able to take advantage of and keep track of their actions towards managing their demand. Another challenge here was the fact that facilities often had multiple meters within their facility, and different utilities have a different way of treating demand charges when there are multiple meters for a facility. Sometimes it's the peak of the sum of the individual meters, or in other cases it can be the sum of the peaks in terms of how those meters are treated in terms of the demand charges. And our platform has the flexibility to accommodate either scenario. But you can see here for this customer, they're able to look at that totalized usage and demand profile. They're able to investigate, across the different intervals, 15-minute interval, hourly data, look at the daily peaks or in each month's peak, and the ability to kind of toggle on or off any of those meters within the facility. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt here. He's going to continue on with some of the lessons learned and some of the results of the program.
Great, thanks, Mark. So I'm going to bring us home and go over some lessons learned and wrap up with some quantitative and qualitative results now that the pilot has officially completed. So in terms of incentive structure, most trade allies or building automation providers, I'll use those terms interchangeably, dislike the structure of the trade ally incentive, and customers universally dislike the incentive structure as well. Much of that was due to the required RFP language that limited the dollar per kW that the pilot could pay out to customers. So the pilot team had to find creative ways to spend the incentive budget provided. In some instances, the participants set up arrangements with their building automation providers whereby the building automation provider would reimburse the customer for the payments to the program made to them, and then the building automation provider or trade ally would continue to bill on a T&M basis. In terms of trade ally knowledge, we found that the more involved and engaged the trade allies were, the better off the customer performed for the most part. Those customers with existing service contracts with trade allies usually saw more immediate action and an overall increase in pilot attentiveness. We did find that there was a learning curve for most trade allies involved in the pilot, as they were more oriented towards strategies that reduced energy consumption and not specifically on peak demand. On a few occasions even, the trade allies' lack of knowledge or programming capabilities were responsible for setting the maximum monthly demand for those customers as well. So in terms of ideal building types, based on our observations over the 40 or so program participants, we found that buildings in the hospitality and entertainment industries, hotels, the casino, convention center, we had a performing arts center participate. Most of those did not perform well, with 6 buildings having an average savings of only 2% per month. Complex medical facilities, we had 3 buildings enrolled that would qualify as a complex medical facility, only yielded an average savings of about 3%. So we found that it was difficult for customers to reduce their demand at these facilities because they didn't have complete control over the environment, as making changes to the spaces would impact customer comfort. For example, facility staff don't have control over hotel guest rooms, and many event and medical spaces obviously have very stringent temperature and light level settings that we couldn't really change or play with. In contrast, buildings in the manufacturing industry performed very well, with 10 buildings having an average savings of 14% per month. Educational facilities also performed very well, with 6 buildings having an average savings of 13% per month. We had 8 buildings classified as office space, and they had an average savings of 7%. In terms of ideal customer characteristics, we observed that the most successful customers often had the following. They had a strong understanding of their building equipment. They had an updated building automation system or energy management system that controlled a majority of the major energy using equipment for that facility. And they tended to have a pre-existing relationship with their building automation contractor. They had leadership support or decision-making ability or autonomy, and a demand curve with a fairly pronounced peak. It wasn't a flat, smooth line. So the ability to shed or shift loads that were not critical to their business model. They also needed to have an openness to trying new strategies, and most importantly, they had to have a pilot champion and time to dedicate to the program. Okay, so the pilot results, drum roll. So we found that between the months of June and September of 2016, the total kW saved for a typical month was almost 2.8 megawatts. This was an additive monthly sum, which is the average of the additive monthly sum for those 40 or so participants. As a result, those participants saved in total over $150,000 in on-peak demand charges alone. So the average customer's monthly demand savings was about 9%. And this wasn't something that we intended to track, but after the pilot was completed, we wanted to see if there would be any ancillary benefits for the customer, even though this pilot wasn't intended to reduce energy consumption per se. We did find that those customers that saved on their on-peak demand, that also equated to saving kWh energy consumption as well, to the tune of about 4.5% per month. Okay, so after we had all of the interval data, we looked to see what the impact of the program would be for the utility if the 39 to 40 customer sites were to represent the entirety of MGE's customer base and their grid only served them. So we overlaid each 15-minute interval point at the exact times to see how the utility coincident demand for MGE was impacted. So as you can see, for June and July, the program saved the utility around 2.5 megawatts on average from the active participants in the program. August was much more muted, and September actually showed a slightly increased coincident peak. And the real reason for that was that 75% of the customers in the pilot, they all peaked on September 6th, which was also the hottest day of the month that day. I believe the high dry bulb temperature was about 87 degrees, and they all peaked within like 2 to 3 hours of each other, which led to no coincident peak demand savings for the utility. So considering that utility coincident demand savings was not an objective of the pilot, nor did the online portal receive peak event signals from MGE during the pilot period, the fact that for June and July, the utility was able to reduce its load on average 2.5 megawatts from just 39 customers, I think is pretty incredible. Okay, so now the next couple slides are focused on the process evaluation results. The Cadmus Group, they are the third-party evaluation contractor for the entire Focus on Energy portfolio, and they conducted their final process evaluation in January of 2017. So these are some of the most impactful things that we found from them interviewing 13 of our pilot participants at the end of the pilot period. So they were asked, do you have a better understanding of the utility bill and how demand charges impact your costs? And 12 of those 13 participants or respondents found that yes, they do now have a better understanding of how their on-peak demand charges can impact their overall utility costs, with one lone dissenter saying they still had the same understanding. Respondents were also asked, do you have a better understanding of strategies now to reduce your peak demand? And 13 out of 13 respondents, 100% said yes, absolutely. So great results there. We also found in looking at the process evaluation results that this pilot generated a greater affinity for Madison Gas and Electric, as all respondents showed a positive opinion of Madison Gas and Electric, with 41% stating that the relationship has strengthened or improved as a result of their participation in the pilot as well. Also, we found that there was a greater affinity for Focus on Energy, with all respondents showing a positive opinion of Focus and 53% of them stating that the relationship has strengthened or improved as well. And this was somewhat of a surprise. They also their opinion was that now through the participation in the pilot, they have a better understanding and appreciation for the building automation system and its capabilities, and now think differently about how they can use that building automation system to reduce utility costs. So this is basically our last slide before Mark and I show our contact information, but I wanted to close the presentation by providing a commentary on where we think the on-demand savings model can fit within a hierarchy of a demand-side management portfolio. We feel as though it's a natural stepping stone in the customer experience from participating in standard energy efficiency programs that focus on electric consumption savings through a prescriptive and a custom model. And we feel this can provide a natural progression towards the customer becoming a demand response participant. This model can also increase customer satisfaction scores and utility affinity by providing incentives and education through this model that allows them to shed load when it makes sense for them as well as for the utility. For those utility partners that really want to focus purely on demand response, several of Accelerated Innovation's utility partners currently leverage MyMeter's system messaging capabilities to alert customers when the utility is forecasting or experiencing a peak system utilization. And the platform also allows the utility administrator to push out notification emails and SMS text messages and provide suggestions for customers to reduce their energy demand. The system can segment the customer population to target messaging based on rate class or customer facility attributes and end uses. So with that, our contact information is provided here. Both Mark Brown and I would like to sincerely thank you for taking the time to participate in the webinar. We know how challenging it can be to carve out some free time during our busy work days and invest in a webinar, but we hope that you felt the information that we provided was valuable, and we would absolutely be more than happy to chat with you about anything you learned today in the future, near future, distant future. So thank you very much.